Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of The Federal. My name is Naved Anjum, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, A.S. Panneerselvan. He's a fellow at Roja Muthiah Research Library in Chennai and head of its Center for Study in Public Sphere. Panneerselvan was also the reader's editor at The Hindu for nearly a decade. He has been a regular columnist, and he's also an adjunct faculty member of the Asian College of Journalism in Chennai. Welcome to the show, Mr. Panneerselvan. It's good to have you
Thank
with us.
you. Thank you.
Right. So, just by way of an introduction, sir, to your writing. I mean, of course, you wrote in 2021, I believe, a biography of Karunanidhi. It is supposed to be the most definitive biography of him, actually, which focuses on his literary and journalistic contributions as well. Um, Today we'll begin with the biography of the autobiography of M.K. Stalin, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, which you have just translated. Is called One Among You, and Penguin Random House has published it. Is the first volume, of course, of Stalin's autobiography written in Tamil. It's called Ungalil Oruvan. Am I getting it right, sir?
Ungalil Oruvan.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it is the story of his formative years, of his first 23 years of his life, which follows his trajectory from 1953 to 1976, and these were very crucial years in the sense that it shaped his sensibility, as a leader, and it talks about his school and college days, his sort of early involvement with the DMK, his role also in the party publications, including Murosoli. To begin with, sir, if you could give us a sense of translating this one, because in the introduction, I think Mr. Stalin has said that you have got the tone and tenor of the Tamil right, and he's very pleased with how the book has come about.
See, the key question is we have two traditions. One is a oral tradition, and another one is a literary written tradition. Oral tradition as a way to touch everybody's heart directly. Therefore, what Mr. Stalin has done in his autobiography is to invoke the long oral tradition of Tamil so that it is much more direct. It is less of metaphors, but more of description. Therefore, this idea of speaking from the heart is the one which makes this autobiography very, very important. Another thing is, Tamil Nadu is known for its autobiography tradition. In fact, one of the earliest autobiography anywhere in Asia happened in Tamil. It's called Anandarangam Pillai's Diary. It was in two languages, Tamil and in French, because Anandarangam Pillai was also Dubash of the French in Pondicherry. But right from the days of Anandarangam Pillai, there is an attempt to understand our external world using personal experience. Therefore, in Tamil, what we use as two categories, Agam and Puram, where Puram is exterior and Agam is interior. But in autobiography, you use your personal self to understand the world. And that's the reason these autobiographies are becoming really interesting to understand the trajectory of the state itself.
Right. Absolutely, and of course, it's a personal a biography, autobiography by its very nature is kind of a personal endeavor in the sense that a writer tends to draw on his life, and they're very intimate and personal moments. But in very many ways, this is also a political exercise in the case of Mr. M.K. Stalin, in the
Yeah.
sense that his sort of personal sort of blends with the political in his case. And he begins, I think, in the introduction, he says that how he was destined to be a politician, that how the Dravidian ideology is something which serves as a life affirming principle for him. So if you could give us a sense of how this book and what he writes about in this book is at the core of who he is as a politician.
See, he was born in 1953. It's a very, very important year because that was a year after India's first general election. And that was also a year after the launch of the most defining film scripted by his father, Parasakti. Parasakti in the first general elections happened in 1952, which means Stalin is born in a truly modern, independent India.
Absolutely.
With the first general election, modern India, the post-colonial modern India is there to stay. Therefore, he's a child of, he's not a midnight children. He is child of Indian Republic.
Independent India.
The moment you understand that he is a child of Indian Republic, we also know the context in which we can look at all the issues. His party was 4 years old. It was launched in 1949. 1952, the first general election had taken place. His father's most defining film was released a year earlier. And by 53, his father was also a leading political leader in his own right. He was leading the language struggle for the DMK. It's called the Kalakudi struggle. They were given these facts. When you are born as a son of a father who is a great leader, then the gap between personal and political is very little. One forms the other. Therefore, this entire biography is the intertwining of personal and political. Therefore, the public persona and the private persona, one informs the other and one enriches the other. And the way one enriches the other is the one which he has meticulously documented. And that was the most fascinating aspect for me to take up this task of translating this book.
Right, absolutely. And also the fact that, he was born into a family, and Karunanidhi himself was, such an iconic figure, not just in Tamil Nadu, but also, in the wider context of, the national politics and the kind of role he played later on when, DMK was part of the UPA government. I wanted to understand from you these four leaders he mentioned, those who sort of shaped his political sensibility. Of course, I mean he begins from Periyar, but he also talks about his own father, that's M. Karunanidhi, and how he sort of their philosophy, their contributions, their role in some sense uh, helped him become what he eventually became.
See, Periyar, Anna, Kalaignar, and Perasariyar, the four people whom he mentions, he had a fairly excellent working relationship with the last two, that is Perasariyar and Kalaignar, because other two actually pass away much earlier. Anna passes away in 69 and Periyar passes away in 73. Therefore, those two people he imbibed as a idea and as a conceptual understanding. And the entire organic relationship is through his equation with the party and his equation with the magazine and the newspaper Murusuli. Therefore, it is through these angular links is the one which, but whereas with Kalaignar and Perasariyar, he worked closely with them because when the youth wing of the party was launched, Perasariyar, as the general secretary of the party, was in charge of the youth wing. Therefore, at some level, what Mr. Stalin has understood today is essentially his interaction with these two, because at some level, both of them also helped Stalin, because those two leaders also made a major shift within the party's understanding, because it's one party which came to power in a pre-liberalized India. It came to power in 1967, but it's surviving as a major political force even today, when liberalization happened in 1991. Therefore, the shift in the political process of the 1991 has been imbibed by those two leaders. Perasrier and Kalaignar.
Yes.
But the adjustments what they made to the party, to their approach to various issues, all those things are the major lessons what Mr. Stalin learned from these two stalwarts.
Right.
And I think that is one which has given him the courage today to be part of this huge uh, formation of the opposition parties. The way he has become the fulcrum of India because he has been witness to this entire exercise.
Right. He writes very beautifully in the introduction that that he stands under the benign shade of their their leadership, and benign shade created by them, and also how they worked as gigantic sort of umbrellas for him, and how they were also sculptors who shaped him. So yes, so I wanted to ask you, because he also mentions in the introduction that of course he was you know he talks about he calls him Thalaiva, and uh, and he says that more than me in this book, it's he who is visible,
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful way of saying, because actually he writes about he circles back to his story a lot, and how much he sort of how much he owes to him, as a son who is also an inheritor of his legacy in some sense.
See, for that we have to really understand what Kalaignar represented within the Tamil psyche.
Absolutely.
Kalaignar emerged as a much bigger, influential figure when he was less than 24. And he is a person who introduces two great stars. M.J. Ramachandran he, becomes a star after acting in Kalaigner's film. And Sivaji Ganesan makes his debut in Parasakti in 52. Therefore, from 49 to 52, Kalaignar emerges as a major voice of Tamil Nadu.
Hmm. Hmm.
By becoming this major voice, he also makes one distinction within our Indian body polity. He says Indian body polity has two trajectories. One trajectory is coming together, another trajectory is holding together. In holding together, you give the power to the state. In coming together, you empower the citizens. Therefore, the DMK's idea of citizen centric, where you come together rather than transferring the power to the state, has been the central for his politics. And those formative years of DMK forming its position from 49 to DMK contest only in 1957, but the party was formed in 49. For 49 to 57 journey is about this journey of how we are going to foreground the idea of coming together as opposed to holding together ideas.
Yeah.
Because holding together is very easy, where you can empower your institutions like police or army.
Hmm. Hmm.
But coming together as a much more layered approach, where citizens should feel that they invested in this idea.
Right.
Therefore, that idea of citizens' investment in the idea is being central to this political party. And that trajectory is the one which Mr. Stalin had a ringside view, because since Stalin grew up as a boy in that household, he's also had an opportunity to witness the tricky questions which the party tried to address and to negotiate difficult realities. Therefore, this negotiating difficult realities becomes part of his growing up. In fact, one chapter in the book is about as a child is meeting with his father in the Trichy, in the jail.
Mhm. Yeah.
Therefore, the entire idea is his father has been arrested for the language struggle.
Yes. Yes.
Therefore, as a 6 months old toddler, your first interaction with your father is in the jail. Therefore, you also understand these two trajectories very clearly.
Hmm.
Only when you are thinking about holding together trajectory, you're going to arrest people who are fighting for the rights. If you are going to support the idea of coming together,
Hmm.
then the democratic space is much more. Therefore, this idea of democratic space is another one which comes out very clearly through this biography.
Hmm. Hmm. Right. So out of the 23 years that the book talks about, there are different facets of his life. Of course, his education, his his engagement with, of course, the party publication Rosoli. Then there's also bits about his theater and the and cinema and his marriage, leading to those custodial excesses and his arrest under MISA during the emergency. And if I could ask you about, how sort of, if you could give us a sense of his education and then his this year of under arrest, which it describes in the jail, which it describes that it was a period of rest relatively, because these were the years which were very hectic for him also in some sense. Too many things happening.
Yeah, post 1976, the book doesn't really document because that has been kept for the second volume.
Yeah, yeah.
Therefore,
In which it talks
uh,
about the
yeah,
experience.
therefore, what happened in the central prison, we really, it's not come out fully clearly right now. The way it is up to his arrest in 1976 is the one which has been documented.
Okay.
It very clearly says that he had to face the excesses of the state. But beyond that, those details are going to come only in the second volume, and that's not there in the volume one.
The experiences of the jail, you mean?
Yes, his jail experiences are in the volume two.
Yes.
Here, the most interesting one is two trajectories within the party. One is party becomes so entrenched in the state where the center feels a necessity to have some cleavage within the party.
Yes.
Therefore, the split of the DMK in 1972, he touches it, where he talks about his relationship with MGR, a very warm and cordial relationship, and MGR's personal warmth with Kalaignar. And despite that, the 72 split happens. And when the 72 split happens, how the party reacted is the most interesting layered story what we come in this autobiography. That is where the political interest and the public interest is paramount compared to your personal equations. Therefore, Kalaignar, as well as members of his family, including Mr. Stalin, have decided to put the interest of the party above their personal equations. That comes out very clearly. And that is a very, very important lesson for us to take away from this book. And the second thing is, despite Kalaignar's insistence that he goes through formal education, he stops with graduation. Therefore, the lure of politics is and the power of public engagement is so central in his trajectory. Though he starts as Gopalapuram Youth Congress and Youth DMK way back in 1968, therefore, though the Gopalapuram Youth DMK of Mr. Stalin was established in 1968, he was very, very clear that politics is going to be his trajectory. And the way he managed to negotiate this difficult decision, for him, the decision to become a politician was easy. But the convey this to his father was far more difficult. Therefore, when you are talking about this public versus personal interaction, the public versus personal traction, I think this is the key one which comes out. Here is a personal decision you have taken to become a politician, but you are not finding it easy to say it to your father, who was also the party president. Therefore, for him, actually, a lot of people generally say that, yeah, was the son of a leader, the way he became a leader.
Hmm.
But being actually son of the leader delayed his ascendancy.
Yeah.
Remember, uh, DMK's statewide youth wing was established by 82, and he gets elected in 1989. And in 1996, he becomes the elected mayor of the Chennai. Despite
Yes.
all those things, he was not inducted in the cabinet as late as 2006.
Right.
Therefore, actually, his he learned enormous political skills by being Kalingar's son, but also being Kalingar's son delayed his political ascendancy.
Hmm.
He never talks about it, but if we look at it in an objective manner, if you are trying to actually map his trajectory on a scale,
Right.
we will know that he is far more senior to most of the national political leaders today. Most of
Yes.
the national political leaders were not in the scene
Hmm.
when Mr. Stalin was arrested in 1976.
Right. Right.
So
So
given that, negotiating personal and political is the one which comes out so well and so clearly in the autobiography.
right. I wanted to ask you a question about his years as a mayor, and there were a great many developmental works done during that time. And if you could give us a sense of how his years as a mayor prepared him for, in some sense, the later years as the chief minister of the state.
There are three components to him being the mayor. First is he was the first directly elected mayor.
Yes. Yes.
And the fact that he was a directly elected mayor generated so much of insecurity with the Jayalalitha government. In 2001, when she returned to power, she changed that entire structure.
Right.
The way he happens to be the only directly elected mayor of the state, which is a different story in its own.
Hmm. Hmm.
Second thing is being directly elected mayor
Hmm.
for a big city like Chennai means you are getting exposed to the requirements of the state at a microcosm level. At
Yes.
some level, the city of Chennai represents Tamil Nadu in a minor scale. By
Yes.
delivering for Chennai, you also understand the demands of Tamil Nadu.
Yes.
Because the Madras Corporation has number of schools, it has number of primary health institutions, it has infrastructure requirements. Therefore, it has all the elements of the state. By addressing the corporation school upliftment, by modernizing the corporation hospitals and the primary health centers associated with the corporation, by addressing the infrastructural needs of the state,
Hmm.
of the city, he understood the requirements of the state.
Hmm.
And remember, these things happened 5 years after liberalization, which means by 1996, the demand on the urban infrastructure was at a much higher level
Hmm.
because there was a accelerated growth and you need to have infrastructure to accommodate all the new pressures.
Yeah.
And remember, the Chennai's uh, surrounding areas are becoming the industrial hub. Therefore, you have your Ford factory here, you have your Hyundai factory here, you have your BMW factory here. Therefore, the Chennai's surroundings are the industrial hub. The moment some places are becoming emerging as industrial hub, the demand for the infrastructural requirements are huge. And by catering to that infrastructural requirements, you also understood the need of the state in a far better and nuanced manner.
Mhm. Right. Right.
Yeah.
One question about he was, of course, named. He writes that he was named after the Soviet leader Stalin, and he mentions an episode during as a child when he had swallowed a hook,
Yeah.
a steel hook, in fact, and it was later, of course, removed out of his system through medicine and through fruits and all. But it also sort of became a sort of anecdote in the family, which was shared, that that it also sort of I think he mentions poet Karunanandam, who sort of told him that it sort of just proves that he's had that steely nerves, and despite the many things that can fracture, and those years in some
Yes.
sense were.
Therefore, the idea is
Mhm.
when you're facing your political difficulties, when you're
Yes.
facing ruptures,
Mhm. Mhm.
you are able to negotiate these ruptures and difficulties with sense of equanimity because as a child, you have undergone the difficulty of a rupture.
Mhm.
And you know that all ruptures has to heal sometime. Therefore, the idea of healing is the one what he took away from his childhood experience.
Yes.
Therefore, that's the reason you don't find a language of rancor in him. There is always a language of inclusiveness in him.
Mhm.
Therefore, this language of inclusiveness and the language which is free from rancor comes from the simple fact that there may be a personal rupture, but this rupture will heal. Therefore, the idea is, should be focused on healing rather than talking about the difficulty.
Difficulties. True.
Therefore, the way forward has been his focus throughout rather than dwelling on the difficult positions.
Right.
In fact, all the difficult positions in the book, he just glides over. There's only one difficult position where he becomes a bit emotional. That is when he talks about loss of his friend Anbil Puyamuri.
Mhm.
Barring that section, in all other areas, he glides over difficult areas while focusing or giving the emphasis on the steps we should be taking to establish an egalitarian society.
Yeah.
So the way forward has been a very, very clear focus for him.
Mhm. Absolutely. And there are two things related to this that I also wanted to ask you, and that is about like just like his father, he chose to be an atheist in that sense. And you mentioned how the year 1953 was very crucial for so many ways. Also the fact that he was born in the independent India, and I wanted to ask you about this. This it was also the year when the then chief minister Rajaji had introduced this caste-based education, and then in the guise of vocational education, and then there was also this issue of the Hindi imposition, which was of course resisted by Mr. Karunanidhi, and uh, and I wanted to understand if this deliberate act of choosing not to sort of associate yourself with a particular religion, and this not indulge in any sort of overt religiosity, does that is that something that sort of also has influenced the policies as in the government, or
I
how
think
do you look at it? Yes.
this idea of inclusive polity in Tamil Nadu
Hmm.
goes back to late 19th century.
Right.
Therefore, starting from Vallala to Periyar to Anna, Kalinger, Perasriyar, Stalin, for this idea of being the inclusive is so ingrained. Therefore, being an inclusive, there are only two positions. Either I keep my religion as a personal faith in a closed door, or I become an atheist. There is no question of flaunting my faith over everybody else's faith.
Mhm.
Therefore, this, the moment you understand that democracy is an interlocking public, you understand there are few things which has to be curbed. One is your caste pride, and next one is your religious pride.
Hmm.
Because caste pride and religious pride are essentially divisible.
Right.
And that has been deeply ingrained in their writing as well as in their practices.
Mhm.
In fact, one of the earliest documentation of the Dravidian movement is called the Spur Tank Road Talk of Dr. T.M. Nair, one of the founders of the Justice Party. There he says that liberation of the other backward classes can happen only when we respect the liberation of the Dalits.
Mhm. Mhm.
Therefore, the liberation of Dalits is being directly linked with the liberation of the OBCs and MBCs. Therefore, in that sense, the idea of interlocking public is being deeply ingrained, and within this understanding of the interlocking public of a complex society like Indian society. They understood the role of religion. Therefore, the party members are not, all of them are atheists,
Right.
but all of them are very, very clear. If some of them are believers, that belief is kept within the domestic confines.
Right.
That faith has never been brought to the public domain. Public domain has been kept as a interlocking public of multiple faiths, and no faith is given a higher pedestal than the other.
Coming back to the present, sir, how do you look at his years as the chief minister, and then we are talking about these times when there are always these issues with the center, in the sense that, and the governor, of course, because and there's a threat, and a very serious threat to the federal politics, and at a time when to the federal structure of the country, and at a time when southern states, including Tamil Nadu, of course. Has fared better than many of the North Indian, and continues to fare better than
The key
many of the
question
North.
is Stalin has realized that what has happened in India
Yes.
after 2014 is moving away from multinodal developmental towards an extreme centralization.
Yeah.
And they feel that this extreme centralization is not good. To retain the developmental ethos of India, we have to move towards a completely decentralized body politic. Therefore, if you have to move towards a decentralized body politic, what are the elements? First thing is, we can't permit national education policy to be there. Education is a state subject. And unfortunately, it was moved to a concurrent list. But the way the union government is behaving, as if it is in the union list. And this union government even wants to take away cooperatives to the union list and the concurrent list. Therefore, the idea is to strengthen the subjects in the state list. And if you want to strengthen the subject in the state list, you have to raise fundamental political questions. Remember, DMK was one political party which was very, very clear that this 10% EWS reservation was anti-constitutional. DMK was very, very clear that abrogation of Article 370 is not fair.
Right.
Therefore, the state has to decide whether it wants to remain as a one unit or two units. And if there are two units, those two units have to be state. You can't convert a state into two union territories.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, well, what happened in Andhra Pradesh is it was divided, but both are two states. Telangana is a state and Andhra Pradesh is a state. We saw that happening with creation of Jharkhand. We saw that happening with Chhattisgarh. Therefore, creating new state is not an issue. But you can't convert a state into a union territory. After all, India is a union of states. And this idea of India as a union of states is under severe strain. And that is the one which Mr. Stalin understands very clearly. And he is trying to bring back the inherent powers vested with the states back. Therefore, he is resisting this extreme centralization, and that's the reason he has become the fulcrum for the opposition unity. Stalin has become the symbol of opposition unity, not in vacuum, by his successive practices. The way Tamil Nadu handled COVID, the way Tamil Nadu managed to handle its own resources despite the GST dues. All those things, Tamil Nadu is actually giving lessons to others, saying that, look, let's not get into this idea of there's no alternative. Let's work towards alternative. Therefore, what Mr. Stalin has done is he's actually turned on its head the narrative which was coming from the Delhi. The narrative from the Delhi was there's no alternative. Whereas Mr. Stalin's articulation from Chennai is that there is an alternative, and let's work towards that alternative.
Absolutely.
Therefore, it becomes a sense of hope and a symbol of change.
Mm. Right. I would also like you to talk a little bit about this volume of essays that you edited before we talk about the the biography of Karunanidhi. And this particular essay was, I think, came out in 2018. It was called "Uncertain Journeys: Labor Migration from South Asia,"
Yeah.
and it is very important book in the sense, and at a time when there has been a lot of discussion around migrants and the experiences of the migrants, and all these essays in the collection in some sense chronicle and document the horrifying stories of the migrant workers who sort of leave countries in South Asia like Bangladesh, India, including India, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and all, and how they go to the Middle East to work and Southeast Asia to work, and the kind of very inhuman conditions that they live in. They're suffering as a forced laborer, as forced laborers, and the abuse that they go through, and in some sense that de facto imprisonment that they have to sort of suffer. So if you could talk about that collection of essays a bit and tell us how it sort of uh, how it how did it come about?
That is essays written by journalists.
Right.
As a journalist, I realize our role has two tracks. One track is to bear witness, another track is to make sense.
Mm.
And our reportage is essentially bearing witness, and making sense is where we do our analytical pieces, our edit pages, articles, our data journalism. All of them belongs to the making sense category. This anthology is to make sense of what we witness.
Right.
First thing, what we realized is that the economic stability of the developing countries come from the hard-working migrant workers.
Mm.
These migrant workers' remittances are the one which is giving certain amount of currency stability,
Yeah.
which means they are the fulcrum of our economic activity. But even when we talk about as if the taxpayer is a higher human being and a migrant worker is a lower human being. Taxpayer is a very small sliver of national earnings. Substantial national earning comes from these hardworking migrant workers.
Right.
And these migrant workers' remittances is the one which is giving us other political as well as economic stability.
Mm.
Therefore, to understand what is their substantial contribution, I thought that it's important to marry journalistic viewpoint with analytical skills to it. That's the reason all those essays in that pieces are done by journalists. But journalists have also decided to do a analytical aspect. Therefore, it is a fusion of good analysis and reportage. The idea is to bear witness as well as make sense of a single theme. Here, the theme was migrant workers. And we also made it very clear that we are not going to look at internal migration, but we are going to look at external migration. Because internal migration will again bring in a completely different levels of complications. Therefore, we thought that let's refrain from getting into complications and look at a single theme very clearly. Yeah.
Right. Now, now let's discuss a little about your biography of Karunanidhi. And he was,
Yeah.
of course, one of the stalwarts of the national politics. We as we spoke about earlier in the interview. And he not only did he serve for 5 terms as the chief minister, he was also the party president, leader of the DMK for over 5 decades. And while we talk about his political contribution, we also tend to sort of overlook his contribution as a cultural figure, and that is also remains something which is very important to discuss. And in the biography, of course, you do not just discuss the politician, but his there's a wider sort of framework, and you sort of establish him in the framework of the national as well as the global politics. If you could talk about this biography a bit, it was in the making for many years, during which you uh,
See,
had
for me, the biggest challenge while writing this biography was what should be the appropriate size of the biography.
right, yeah,
Um, if I have to do an encyclopedic one, it was coming to about 1400 pages.
hmm,
But if it has to reach, it has to be within 500 pages.
yeah,
Therefore, first question which I have to resolve within myself is to whether it's going to be encyclopedic or it's going to have reach. I
yes,
decided to look at reach primarily because not many biographies on the southern leaders have appeared.
hmm,
If it is, and all their substantial writings are in Tamil,
hmm,
half of the misunderstanding happens because people don't really read what they have written.
hmm,
Therefore, I decided to keep a cap of 500 pages.
yeah,
That's the reason, yeah. Though a lot of people are saying it's a most comprehensive biography. I know
hmm,
that it's a abridged biography.
hmm,
Quite a lot of aspects had to be explored further, but I had no space to do it. For
right,
instance, there is a reference to a great artist who was Kalinger's friend. It is N.S. Krishnan.
hmm, hmm,
But there is a orbit for M.S. Krishnan when M.S. Krishnan passes away in 1957
yeah,
or by Kalinger. Kalinger says that N.S. Krishnan is the person who taught us that the Greek comedy is far more profound than Greek tragedy because in comedy you need not have to foreground hate.
hmm,
And remember to write this in 1957. It is much before all the hate crimes what we are witnessing now.
hmm,
Therefore, to understand the power of comedy
hmm,
itself, therefore, if I want to do, I have to just take up each elements of
yeah,
theatre, what he brought in, what
hmm,
he brought in from the Greek theatre, what he brought in from the Broadway, what he brought in from Bernard Shaw, what he brought in from IPTA.
right,
Therefore, he actually borrowed all these theatrical elements into
hmm,
his theatre.
yeah,
That itself would have become a huge work.
hmm,
What I did is I managed to hint at the multifaceted aspects of Kalinger
hmm, hmm,
and go ahead. And despite hinting, I've reached 500 pages limit.
right, right.
Otherwise,
No,
it's been about 1500 to 1600 words.
absolutely, absolutely. No, it's mind-boggling, considering somebody who was sort of born and sort of raised in deprivation to rising to this stature, and the breadth of his work in the sense that he wrote a script for nearly about 67 films. Then he wrote short stories, about 46 odd short stories, 13 plays, 10 novels, two novellas, so many thousands of letters. I think 7,000 letters. And I'm also curious to know because, and I don't know if they are available in English as yet, his own autobiography, which runs into 6 volumes and about nearly 4,000 pages, I believe.
Yeah. Some sections of his autobiography has been translated. I
Okay,
think now the collected work is going to come out as part of his centenary celebrations.
I see.
For part of his centenary celebrations, we are expecting two or three anthologies to come out.
Right. That should be interesting to look forward to, sir.
Yeah.
One last question, and then we wind up, sir,
Yes.
because you also teach at ACJ, and I was just a little curious that we tend to reflect a lot these days on the state and the future of journalism, and considering that you yourself have been you've been a part of the industry in some sense. How do you look at the state today? It's so many
See,
of us do not see it as a very happy rosy picture, and we
yeah,
tend to portray a
the,
very bleak sort of
the
uh,
biggest crisis today we face is the digital disruption. The word digital has given us a possibility of ensuring reach, but digital has also not given us a viable revenue model. Therefore, we are in a strange situation where we have reach, but we don't have enough revenue, and we need enormous revenue to do the fundamental aspect of journalism, which is bearing witness. Because we don't have enough resources, we are trying to concentrate on making sense. Therefore, now every major development, you get some expert to write to explain what it is. But we don't have somebody reporting from the field. When demonetization happened, we did not have people going to various centers and reporting us what was happening there. When Article 370 was abrogated, we did not go to Kashmir to know what happened with the internet shutdown and the abrogation of the Article 370. Therefore, what is happening today in journalism is that the resource crunch is forcing people to focus more on making sense component of journalism than less on bearing witness. I think unless and otherwise there is a balance between bearing witness and making sense. Making sense may not even appeal to anybody because they don't know about what we are talking. If I'm not going to report about what happened in Galwan, and if I'm going to talk about the equation between India and China in a abstract manner, there's a disconnect. And what we are witnessing is a growing disconnect, primarily because making sense component of journalism is there, but bearing witness component is coming down drastically. And there were two instances which we have to keep in mind, because one was the West Bengal elections. West Bengal elections, if you are looking only at the Indian media, you would have thought that the BJP is within the striking distance. But when the election results came in, we realized that BJP was nowhere there. That is primarily because the focus was on analysis rather than reportage. If the focus was in reportage, we would have known the changing reality at the ground level. We have very little understanding of the changing reality at the ground level. And that's worrying. And to do that, we need resources. Therefore, we need a viable digital media's revenue model. Unfortunately, we haven't arrived there. Hopefully, we will arrive soon. Unless and otherwise, there is a viable digital revenue model. I don't think we'll be able to have a decent bearing witness component, and without that aspect, that central reportage is the central for journalism.
Yeah.
Analysis and editorial are second.
Right.
That is the body and soul of journalism. We have to restore that. And that's where the pressure is today.
But despite the lack of this viable revenue model, sir, and in recent years, there has been a proliferation in digital platforms. And somewhere, I mean, of course, legacy media has always been around. But some of the most sterling works in journalism these days, at least from where I
So
see.
the key question is, all these initiatives are doing pretty well in making sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. No doubt about it.
What is the reportage on what is happening at the ground level?
Yeah.
Let's talk about specific aspects. Rollout of GST. Have we done reportage from various industrial centers? Do we know what happened in Nasik? Do we know what happened in Tirupur? Do we know what happened in Kanpur? These are the industrial centers. What happened to them? Do we have a reportage? We don't know. But we have quite a lot of scholarly articles on GST.
Right.
GST as centralizing or GST as a single window.
Yeah.
These two trajectories, you have enormous amount of articles. That's what I'm saying, that yes, there is a proliferation, but that proliferation is not leading to bearing witness component.
Yeah.
The key question is we have to strengthen our reportage.
Yeah.
Our reportage is the one which is under severe strain.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really lovely, and it was an absolute pleasure having you with us today. Thank you so much for joining the FED.
Thank you very much.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.